This is John Buckley. He's a Lincolnshire farmer. And John, tell me how long you've been farming.
I've been farming all my life, but I started work on the family farm when I left school, having worked on it prior to that, whenever I could.
And what did the farm produce?
When I first left school, we had sheep, dairy cattle, and most arable crops, wheat, barley, oats, and peas. Vine and peas.
Yeah, and that was when you had a connection to the ice factory in Grimsby.
That's when we had a connection to the ice factory. Originally, all the peas were harvested and carted to static viners, and the viners are the things that separate the peas from the pea haulm, and you end up with the peas just in tanks. And we always had ice to throw onto the top of the tanks, so that they kept them as fresh and as cold as we could until they got to the factory to be processed.
So where were these viners located?
There were various static viner sites. So there was one at Croxby, which is the one I worked on during my school holidays when I was sort of 15, 16, working 18-hour shifts. And then all the pea haulm was brought in, and it had to be fed into the viners by hand. And then as things progressed, we got mobile viners, which would travel into the fields. The peas would cut into swaths in the field, and the viners would go along and separate the peas from the haulm into trailers, put them into trailers. Then there would always be a lorry with a load of ice on it, and somebody had to get into the back of the lorry and throw the ice, shovel the ice onto the top of the peas.
Was that your job?
I didn't actually do that. I was fortunate enough not to do that.
It must have been pretty strenuous, I would think.
Yes, it was. It was, and certainly, because we started so far away from home with the mobile viners, they were all coming back to Grimsby, and you can imagine, sort of 40 years ago, travelling up from Deeping St Nicholas or Spalding and Boston, it took quite a while. So the peas had to be keep them as cold as you could. So the ice would be thrown out of the lorry onto the top of the peas, and then they'd be tipped up into a lorry with a high tipping trailer. And as the peas came out of the trailer into the lorry, then all the ice got mixed in with them to keep them colder. And then, depending on how long the lorry was going to be stood about, you chucked a bit more ice on the top of it to keep them as fresh as possible.
So you're saying that ice came from the Grimsby ice factory all the way down to Spalding?
Absolutely.
To help with the pea harvest?
Yes.
In 1970s?
In the 1970s, yes.
So how many miles is that?
Well, I don't know how many. I wouldn't know how many miles it is, but you're talking about sort of
an hour and a half.
It'd probably be a good hour and a half in those days, yes.
Yes.
And they'd be just sort of 10-ton lorries, and then they'd come back up to the factory. You radioed through from the field to say the lorry was on its way, so the people at the factory knew exactly when to expect a load of peas.
Where was the factory located then? The pea factory.
I can't even remember. Was it just off Ladysmith Road, I think?
Oh yeah, well, that was the Findus factory you're talking about, or
the Findus factory, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the process was, who sent the lorries? Were they your lorries full of ice? Did the farmers send the lorry and get it full of ice and then drive down to Spalding?
And then drive down to Spalding, and then when the lorry, that particular lorry, had used all its ice up, it would probably take a load of peas back to the factory.
Yeah.
So you divert a lorry from the factory who tipped his load of peas there, and you'd say, well, nip up and get a load of ice, and he would just go and his lorry would stand in the field until that ice was all used up, and then he'd join the train really to sort of take his next load of peas back. So it wasn't always the same lorry that was actually carting ice. And
how long did the pea harvest last then?
About 8 weeks. About 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks.
That must have been, do you think that was a big proportion of, I mean, the ice factory must have had to have been well prepared for the pea harvest.
Yes, I suppose they would have, but we wouldn't use huge amounts of ice. Probably a sort of 10-ton load of ice would probably last a whole shift or something like that, you see. because it was pretty, well, it was cold, it was ice, but it didn't melt that quickly. It's not like if you took a couple of ice cubes out of the freezer, that melt fairly quickly. When you've got a big block of ice but it would take a bit of shoveling when you sort of set a bit. You know, it wasn't the best of jobs.
No.
But that's what we had to do.
Yeah. And was it just peas in Lincolnshire, or were there other vegetables that were taken to be grown and frozen?
There's sprouts and things like that, but the difference with sprouts, they'd be harvested when it was colder anyway.
Right.
And they probably wouldn't travel so far.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just that the pea season, you know, we used to start down in the south of the county because they, you know, to try and stagger the pea season. If you just tried to grow them all in one place, they're all the planting of the peas is staggered with, you know, based on soil temperature and things like that. So you actually worked it so that they didn't all come ready together at the same time. And because we started in the south of the county, they were always earlier than we were up on the Wolds. So it sort of prolonged the pea season. And obviously they got more peas because of that.
And when you say we, are you talking about your family farm or
It was
a cooperative of farmers?
It's a group of farmers we all had groups. You know, you had a group of farmers, probably, I don't know what there were, 8 or 9 of us in our group. And I forget what we were called, Blue Group or something like that. And we would be, you know, and you stayed as a group and harvesting your own peas. Occasionally, if you hadn't got any peas ready and another group was struggling to get their peas harvested, you would go over and do sort of yellow group or something like that. There's always a bit of, you know, who can do the job better than anybody else. Mm-hmm. But there were a lot of men involved.
Yes.
You know, when we were when we're doing the mobile viners, there'd be 3 cutters that went on the head of the viners to cut the peas into a swath. Then there were 6 viners. In the early days, you had 2 men to a viner because one man had to be driving the tractor, one man had to be on the viner itself, making sure everything was working all right and checking, you know, that you weren't losing peas and that sort of thing. And then you would have somebody you'd have a diesel truck, you'd have the workshop, you'd have a chuck wagon where you all sort of had your meals, staggered meals and things like that, because you didn't actually stop. Unless the factory said stop, you know, we can't cope with any more peas. You just kept going 24 hours a day. We would go down on a coach from